Without further ado, I would like to give a warm welcome and introduction to all of our panelists. Today we're going to be hearing from Kelly Cobey from the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, who is here today in her role as DORA's co-chair. From Robert Chen, who manages the research analytics team at the University Health Network in Toronto and is also on the BRI Community Steering Committee. We'll be hearing from Christy Hurrell, Acting Associate University Librarian for Collections, Content Services, and Research Support at the University of Calgary. In her previous role, she was involved in the implementation of DORA at the U of C, which was the first university in Canada to sign on to DORA. And finally, from Inba Kehoe, Head of Copyright and Scholarly Communications at the University of Victoria, which signed on to DORA more recently. So I will now invite Kelly to take it away and
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heather, for the welcome, and thank you all for your time today and the offer to speak with you all. So I'm going to kick us off and start talking about sort of what responsible research assessment is and DORA specifically. And to do that, I'm actually going to start off with a story. And the story is about Peter Higgs. So many of you will have known of Higgs, or at least heard of Higgs boson. So he's a physicist who back in 2013 won a Nobel Prize for science. And at that time, he did an interview with The Guardian in the UK. And I have a few snippets from what he said in that interview here on the screen. So first is that he doubts a similar breakthrough could be achieved in today's academic culture because of the expectations on academics to collaborate and keep churning out papers. Then he goes on to say, which really resonated with me, it's difficult to imagine how I would ever have had enough peace and quiet in the present sort of climate to do what I did in 1964. And then finally, it's so extreme to say, today I wouldn't get an academic job. It's as simple as that. I don't think I would have been regarded as productive enough. So I think this is a really great story to illustrate the current context of academia, which is very much captured by this publish or perish mantra. So researchers are typically evaluated on quantitative metrics, and the more you're doing, the better it is. And there's not a whole lot of assessment that's at the qualitative level that looks at sort of what you're actually producing. So is it rigorous, reproducible, and does it meet other best practices we're trying to implement, such as Indigenous engagement, patient engagement, knowledge mobilization, and so on. The reality is that in Canada, like so many other jurisdictions, there's a complete over-reliance traditionally on quantitative metrics. So the journal impact factor is perhaps in some disciplines one of the sort of key indicators used. So in medicine, this is widely used, and it's super problematic. It doesn't make sense. So this metric, I'm speaking to librarians, so many of you will be at least, was actually invented by Eugene Garfield in an effort to help librarians identify which subscription bundles they should be purchasing for their institution. And in fact, had nothing to do with research or researcher assessment, but it's been used in that way. And we know that it has an incredibly skewed distribution. So the impact factor of a journal is practically impossibly able to predict from that the impact of an individual paper. So against this sort of backdrop of this publish or perish climate, and the fact that most research and researchers are assessed in terms of quantitative metrics, enters DORA. So DORA stands for the Declaration on Research Assessment. So it very much started out as an awareness-raising initiative through a declaration, but has grown over 12 years to its present form, which is really very much an initiative to drive improvements. So our mission is to advance practical and robust approaches to improve how research is assessed across all scholarly disciplines globally. So we're discipline agnostic, we're region agnostic, and it's one of the wonderful things about being engaged in DORA is its global nature. I think when I step back and I think about sort of why we need DORA, a quote from the late statistician Doug Altman always comes to mind. So back in 1994, Doug said, we need less research, better research, and research done for the right reasons. And I think that captures a lot of sort of the impetus for DORA. The declaration itself draws attention to potential problems of journal-based metrics in hiring, promotion, and funding decisions, and emphasizes the need to recognize a broader range of scientific outputs. So as researchers, we've always been doing more than just publishing, and we're being asked to do more and more increasingly in terms of new policy mandates, such as open science implementation. And so if we're going to be asked to do those things and we're going to say we have strategic values and visions for doing them, we need to actually incorporate that and incentivize that and reward it. The declaration at DORA is a set of 18 recommendations for distinct actors in the research ecosystem. So something I feel a lot of people don't really realize the degree of nuance. They think it's sort of just one statement against using metrics, but it's much more nuanced than that. The declaration has now been signed by more than 26,000 individuals and organizations. I wanted to highlight two examples of recommendations that are for research institutions. There are pretty, I think, clear actions that institutions can implement. So the first is that when you're assessing someone, you need to be very explicit about the criteria you're using. So whether it's quantitative or qualitative metrics, we need to know what the criteria is, how it's computed, and how it's evaluated. The second recommendation is that, as mentioned earlier, for the purpose of research assessment, we need to consider the value and impact of all research outputs. So not considering the publication the sort of be all and end all of research success. This is not to say that publications shouldn't matter in research assessment. For many researchers, publications are the main conduit for knowledge exchange, and they are going to have value in a sort of DORA compliant system. It's just that they're not the only thing that will have value in that system. We don't have specific recommendations in the declaration for librarians, but I obviously recognize librarians are sort of a cornerstone of research institutions and are often critical actors and champions at institutions for research assessment reform. In the local context, when we think about DORA, we can see that it's been signed by more than 1,000 individuals and over 67 research institutions and organizations, including all of our key federal funders, many provincial funders, and other organizations as well. Just this year in April, we kicked off a national community of practice around responsible research assessment. And so what we did is working through the Canadian Reproducibility Network, which you can go to and sign up for this community of practice. We've identified a group of people and organizations in Canada that share common concern regarding how researchers are being assessed. And we've wanted to create a space for dialogue and experience and resource sharing amongst them so that we're able to collaborate at a national scale to address Canadian specific challenges better and more quickly than in isolation. I have a couple slides that I wanted to talk about to situate today's discussion amongst my peers in the panel regarding Canada's historic context on research assessment. So something somewhat unique in the Canadian context is that because of the British North American Act delegating responsibility of education to the provinces and territories, we, unlike many other jurisdictions, don't actually have a national system of research assessment, and we probably won't, given this sort of circumstance of how education is delivered. And so this is quite different, but what it means is that unlike places like the UK, who have a national research excellence framework, what we have is perhaps a little less clear, right? So what happens province to province and institution to institution may vary considerably. The other thing is that when it comes to research assessment, a lot of people think about university rankings. And I wanted to highlight that in Canada, while rankings occur of all of our universities and institutions, such as those from Times Higher Education, unlike in other countries, these have no bearing on funding received to those institutions. So it's not that if you move up in that list, you get more funding from the federal government by any means. And in fact, in our context, how these may be relevant is the recruitment of international students who use that list to select their sort of educational institution. But practically speaking, it really doesn't make much difference because in Canada, it's actually the number of student visas from the Federal Department of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada that's the main factor influencing our international recruitment. And due to the housing crisis, there's been further caps on these permits. So, we're having far more qualified applicants applying than we're accepting into the country. With regards to implementation of DORA in the local context, I wanted to highlight the great work of the tri-agencies. So the tri-agencies have signed DORA, and this is, in my view, a major catalyst for change in the broader Canadian ecosystem. They have not only signed DORA, they're very, very engaged with DORA and its implementation. So we have seen that each of the agencies have created research excellence frameworks, sort of redefining what research excellence means to them in alignment with their strategic vision of their strategic plans. And another major change is the introduction of the tri-agency narrative CB. So this is something very practical that's going to move us from the traditional CB towards something that will allow for a broader reflection on and more nuanced reflection beyond sort of bean counting publications, funding, and impact factors. Before I close, I wanted to highlight that if you're here today because you're a champion of responsible research assessment or reform at your institution, DORA has a large number of resources that can help you in that role. So we have case studies of how individual institutions have changed their assessment practices. We have a resource library of both DORA-produced tools as well as curated tools produced sort of globally by other organizations. One example is the guidance on responsible use of quantitative indicators in research assessment. So again, it's not that these can't be used, it's that we have to be clear and transparent about how we're using them. And then hot off the press, we have created, just last month, we launched DORA's Practical Guide to Implementing Responsible Research Assessment. So this is a guide that's supposed to take institutions from awareness around the need for responsible research assessment towards actually implementing change through strategic strategy or policies at their institution. So you can think of it as a recipe from taking you from where you are today at your institution towards a strategy for reform. And then last one, we also have ReformScape, which is an observatory of responsible research assessment policies from other research institutions. So this is something, we don't need to likely reinvent the wheel entirely, although there are contextual and regional differences. We can often use policies from other institutions, at least as a meaningful starting point with our research assessment reform. And with that, I'll stop and look forward to taking questions after my co-panelists have spoken.
Thanks a lot, Kelly. That was very illuminating. Rob, if you would like to go next, you can get started.
It works. All right. So hello, everyone. I'm Rob Chen. I'm the manager of research analytics at the University Health Network in Toronto. So as part of the panelists here, we represent a healthcare research organization. I want to talk to you about how we implemented, or we're still implementing DORA at UHN. So quick briefing of UHN. We're the largest research hospital system in Canada. We're 5 or more research institutes. We're undergoing some reorganization right now. But we're a bunch of research institutes spread across a bunch of hospitals effectively. And each of these research institutes have a large amount of autonomy in how they evaluate their researchers. So that has been sort of a challenge in trying to roll out DORA across UHN. So so the timeline of DORA at UHN. So we signed DORA in January 2020. Oh, didn't show up here. And then as part of this, our EVP of Science and Research asked that a advisory group for implementing DORA be formed, and this was formally launched in June of 2020. So this group started off doing a lot of literature review, trying to figure out what is DORA friendly, what isn't DORA friendly, how can we go about actually implementing this at UHN in a practical way. And what this ended up with is by February 2022, we had created a list of DORA-friendly assessment measures tailored for UHN, but really this could really be tailored for any biomedical research facility. So all of this was published in PLOS One. This was a very rigorous scientific process where there wasn't just a literature review, but there was a whole Delphi survey process to figure out exactly what is useful for UHN and other biomedical research organizations. So out of these measures, you'll notice it's measures plural. We came up with kind of 6 themes, and each of these could have multiple sub-themes. There's the relevance of research programs. So going back to Kelly, I'm glad Kelly went first. Just makes so much sense. Kind of like, why does your research matter to humanity as a whole? What does it advance? And then kind of the research outputs, but instead of the traditional, like, hey, count how many papers you have, how many patents you have, etc. It was more of like, hey, choose your 5 favorite publications over the past 5 years and tell us why they matter. You're also free to choose other types of research outputs. As I said, we have many different research institutes. They all specialize in different things. We have one on medical education where they don't necessarily publish academic journal publications as much, but they do other very important things. So you have the opportunity to bring those up here. Funding, everybody loves money. So there's some funding in there as well, collaboration, and challenges. And another important thing we had was challenges to research productivity, just so you could gather information on whether there's something the evaluator should keep in mind when they look at your body of work or your what you wrote up above earlier. So we suggest the advisory group suggested this set of measures. Again, we're a bunch of research institutes, so these were recommendations of research institutes to take up these measures. And then the thing we did next was we investigated what barriers there were to implementing these measures for research institutes at UHN. So to do that, there was a bunch of interviews of academics and also administrative staff to see what issues could arise. And we reported on these barriers and suggested strategies on how to overcome them in another publication in 2023. So you can see the publication here. This is recorded. You can look it up afterwards. So kind of an update on where we are with DORA right now. Our various research institutes, again, they all have their own processes and evaluation guidelines, but they've all taken these our suggested guidelines into consideration for their annual activity reviews, where UHN actually has a harmonized system across almost all the research institutes, so that we're gathering the same amount of questions and information from all of our researchers. And then it's not really a true narrative CV right now, but it does contain many of the proposed DORA measures that the DORA advisory group came up with. For reviews beyond the annual activity reviews, for promotions and deep dives, the research institutes are all revising, if they haven't already, revised their evaluation guidelines to take into account the suggestions from the DORA advisory group. And the other research institutes have committed to do so, even though it's still underway. And then on a much larger organizational level at UHN, UHN has come up with key performance indicators to measure UHN's performance. And while it's a lot harder to do things like narrative CVs on an organizational level, we have taken into account that there should be a large array of metrics that get measured, and that journal-based metrics should be avoided. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak here, and I'll wait for questions at the end of the panel. I should also thank the DORA Advisory Committee. It was actually led by one of our senior scientists, Anna Gagliardi. She's unfortunately retiring, so she's very hard to get to come out to talk now. All right, thanks.
Thanks very much, Rob. Christy, you're up next.
Okay, great. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about what is happening at the University of Calgary. And for those of you who were at the BRIC conference a couple of weeks ago, I apologize in advance. There's a bit of overlap between the presentation that my colleague Faye and I did there and this one. So I'm here to talk a little bit about what we've done at the University of Calgary in terms of implementing DORA. I just want to start off by saying that I certainly can't pretend that the library or myself has been the key driver behind all of this work. It's been a team approach for sure. And there is quite a large team, which I think kind of shows that the university was pretty serious about providing some resources around DORA implementation. So the Knowledge to Impact team, which is led by my colleague Stephanie Warner, is part of our research services office. And they have really been driving this initiative around DORA and actually hired a couple of staff specifically to help implement DORA. So they represent the research services side, and then Heather and I are sort of on the library side. We've been, teaching about research impact for a number of years now, and sort of tag teaming that as our assignments have varied, and continue to do so in collaboration with the research office. So again, just like Rob, I'm going to show a timeline. So the University of Calgary was the first university in Canada to sign on to DORA, and we signed on in January 2021. And the initiative is a partnership between the research office as well as the provost's office, which is important because academic assessment organizationally is underneath our provost, vice provost academic. So it's important for those units both to be involved. And we really were interested in better ways of assessing impact and considering more diverse forms of scholarship. So at the University of Calgary, we have sort of strategic initiatives right now around transdisciplinary scholarship. And the way the University of Calgary has defined transdisciplinary scholarship is a little interesting. It has a component that's really focused around involvement of community and sharing and giving communities that are impacted by research or the results of research a say in how that research is used. So I think that strategic initiative is very DORA friendly. We also have a new initiative around open science, which of course has a lot of overlap with DORA principles as well. So subsequent to us signing on in June 2021, DORA was referenced in our academic handbook. The handbook exists to assist all academic staff understand the criteria necessary for academic progression between and within ranks, including requirements for transfer, renewal, tenure, and promotion, as well as merit, which has changed a bit since then, but it applies to all academic staff at the University of Calgary. So it's quite an overarching document that provides guidance on all sorts of promotion-related activities at the University of Calgary. So I think having DORA mentioned in that document was a really strong starting place for institutional change. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slide, there was a team sort of established to help with the DORA implementation, and 2 full-time staff were hired in the research office in November 2021. Over the course of 2022-2023, we sort of did a document review so that the team reviewed all sorts of policy documents that we have within our institution around hiring, promotion, tenure, and that sort of thing. And they also did a lot of kind of socialization of DORA. So they went out to many faculties around campus to talk about DORA, what it was, what it wasn't, and try to just spread the word. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then in the last year or so, the team's really been working on kind of operationalizing DORA principles. So we've been developing a research impact framework that has kind of broad categories of research impact, and then a menu of indicators. So this menu is quite extensive at the moment. It has over 150 indicators on it in a bunch of different categories. And that's something I'm not going to talk about too much today because it's just nascent work. I'm sure you'll hear more about it throughout the next few months. And then we also published some guidelines for writing a narrative CV. So just to talk a little bit more about our academic handbook. So this is the one I referenced that was updated in June 2021. And this is the specific language on the screen that was included in our academic handbook. So I think this was an important start, saying that in keeping with the commitment of the University of Calgary to DORA, research and scholarship activities shall be evaluated based on the quality of the research and scholarship, relying on robust tools and approaches to assessing research quality and impact rather than on bibliometrics alone. This includes considering the merit of all research and scholarship outputs, as well as a broad range of qualitative impact indicators such as influence on policy and practice. So this kind of set the stage for other policy documents at the department and faculty level to be updated. So underneath this overarching academic handbook that applies to all academic staff, each faculty also had to update their guidelines in keeping with this statement. So there's been sort of varied progress on that goal to date. We have 14 faculties at the University of Calgary, and since 2021, I think 10 out of 14 of the guidelines have discontinued the use of journal-based metrics to assess research quality. So where things like journal impact factor or other metrics used to appear in faculty-related guidelines, those have disappeared to be replaced with more DORA-friendly language. And 11 out of 14 of our faculty level guidelines emphasize that research quality should be judged based on the merit of the publications themselves, rather than the prestige of the venues in which they were published. So we're really looking at not looking at the containers where things are published, but at the merits of the research itself. And then all of our faculty guidelines recognize a broad range of outputs and impacts, both qualitative and quantitative. So this has been really exciting. I think like many librarians, I've always been pushing our repositories as places where diverse outputs can live and get more visibility. And so I think it's been really gratifying to see more and more people across our campus be interested in depositing things like policy briefs or workshop reports or data sets to our repositories, and actually starting to think about those as potentially impactful research outputs. I will say that, we know what's going on at the policy level. How these things are actually implemented at the department and at the committee level, individual tenure and promotion committees, for example, or hiring committees. It's really hard to know exactly what's going on there, except when people come to someone like Heather or me for help, or with a crisis, or looking for guidance. So I think that's something that maybe we can get into in the Q&A about, although things may look very smooth at the policy or procedure level, of course, on the ground, the way they unfold can be different. So I was part of this working group between 2021 and 2023 that involved representation from all faculties at the University of Calgary. And this group was really helpful to bring together diverse perspectives from across disciplines about the types of research assessment that are appropriate to measure diverse forms of impact. I think it identified areas of strengths in our existing assessment efforts, as well as areas where additional resources could be developed. We also drafted an institution-specific research impact statement that articulated our values and goals for this work. And thanks to the University of Alberta for providing us some a draft to start with in that area. And then since then, the Knowledge Impact team has been involved in, like I said, kind of socializing DORA on our campus. We invited a whole bunch of internal and external speakers. I think Kelly was one of them, and we had other Canadian experts like Dr. Vincent Lariviere, Dr. Stephanie Haustein to come in and talk about research assessment from a scholarly perspective. And I think those webinars had good attendance and good feedback about them. There is a DORA-specific website at the University of Calgary with lots of resources. I'll put that into the chat when I'm done speaking. And then, as I was mentioning, we supported policy updates in terms of faculty level guidelines, university level guidelines, and then also our academic selection toolkit. So academic staff who sit on hiring committees at the University of Calgary are required to take mandatory training from HR about how to avoid bias and things like that in our selection. And some DORA principles were integrated into that training as well. And I've subsequently taken that training since those changes were developed. And they were actually they did a really great job, HR. And it really, in the session I was in, it resulted in some really interesting conversation and discussion. We have produced some guidance for folks who are writing narrative CVs, sort of in anticipation of the tri-agency changes, and been working with all sorts of folks, both internally and externally, to talk about what we're doing here at the university. So specifically at the library, we've been teaching and providing reference services about bibliometrics for many years, Heather and I and some other colleagues. And I'd say, we've been taking kind of a evidence-based approach to teaching about metrics. So, how do you calculate the journal impact factor? What are the appropriate use cases, inappropriate use cases, and same things for things like H-index and other commonly used metrics. I think Since we signed on to DORA, we've been able to be a little bit stronger in our recommendations about what you should and should not do in terms of using metrics in things like grant applications or applications for tenure and promotion. So that's been really helpful. We've also been more tightly collaborating with our colleagues in the Knowledge to Impact team to do co-teaching and refer to each other back and forth when we have questions coming in from researchers and about particular things. And then Heather and I do continue to provide kind of personalized assistance to researchers when they ask. Another significant thing that we did in collaboration with colleagues in our medical school and the Research Services Office was acquire Overton. So that's probably a tool that many of you are already familiar with, but it's a tool that helps track the impact of peer-reviewed literature on policy. And so kind of helps look at a more diverse range of impacts than we otherwise would be. So where we're at now, developing, like I said, this menu of impact indicators that's quite extensive and covers all sorts of types of impact, developing a framework for research impact and providing guidance on narrative CVs and other ways to describe your impact besides what we've been used to over the years with a common CV type thing. So I think that's all I have for today. I don't want to take up too much time for questions, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker, Imba.
Thank you, Christy. Feel free to go ahead, Imba.
Okay. Again, thanks for the invitation to present here. The difference between what we're doing at UVic and what Christy and Rob have described at their institutions is that we are really, really at the beginning stages. So we just signed, as Heather mentioned, last year, actually. So I'm here to talk to where we're going probably in the next few months. So what I thought I'd cover is our library partnership with our VP Research and Innovation, how we ended up signing DORA, a little bit of the implementation and progress to date, okay? So our partnership with the research office has been quite extensive over the years, but recently with our appointment of the Director for Research Intelligence, Dane Berry, who I believe is also on this call, we've been working together on several different things. Some of it is around rankings, looking at licensing and sort of sharing costs for those licensing options, looking at Open Alex maybe as a switch. So we're still looking into all of those things. We've talked about ORCID implementation and mediated service that we provide. So this is really, really key, especially with our fine arts faculty, where we haven't really had too much of an interest from them to sign on to ORCID. So that was a sort of discussion Dane and I had with the Dean of Fine Arts, and then we went to talk to them and now have experience working with some of the fine arts folks with populating their ORCID profiles. The other things that we have worked on is a grants menu that we help with pre and post awards. So Dane's office has kindly provided us with some data that we can use in using Power BI. They've created some data around our research awards so that we could possibly work with the research office and talk about what we can provide from the library and in terms of support for them before a grant is applied for or after the grant is applied for. And recently our grants and awards librarian did organize a session so that we invited all the grants officers on campus to come, and we had a presentation on Power BI, data services, ORCID, talking about our read and publish agreements and our knowledge mobilization efforts. So that's sort of where our partnership with the research office is currently at. With the DORA, signing on to DORA, what we did was Dane and I did a joint presentation to the Research Advisory Council early last year and talked to them about what DORA is about, where can it be helpful. And we had quite the vigorous discussion during that session, and all around mostly evaluation practices and when should these be changed and how much effort it would take to make these changes. And we also knew that there was a collective agreement coming up for renegotiation as well. So we're thinking about we're discussing how some of these changes could be introduced in our negotiations. So what was nice was that Research Advisory Council voted to send the proposal to our Executive Council, and in February 24, the Executive Council approved the proposal, and then we signed on to DORA. As far as implementation goes, we just started working on this year, and both our associate vice provost and our deputy provost attended a DORA meeting in January to look at, and they had a one-day meeting with them in, can't remember where it was now, but they were looking at that guide that Christy was mentioning earlier, and so had Kelly. So the guide to implementing responsible research assessment. So they got some introduction to it, and they were very excited when they came back from it. And the second thing that we've done is we also have a tutorial for hiring. And Dane was great in adding some language around DORA into that tutorial. And we're currently this year in our negotiations with the faculty collective agreement. So we're hoping to add some enabling language and some language around responsible research assessment. And from that, we will have changes with the faculty evaluation policies. Transparency is a huge thing that's not there at all at UVEX. So that's something I'm looking forward to seeing. And then the provost office is also working towards looking at a single CV with impact narrative working towards merit promotion awards and reframing some of those what's happening on campus. I think what we're trying to do is start maybe with the awards area, because that might be a way to introduce DORA as well as the impact narrative CV. So that's sort of where we are with that. And in July of this year, what's happening is we have a new associate VP for research who is taking sort of ownership around this area. So I'm kind of looking forward to her coming back and starting this off. And what we've done is we have now a librarian secondment starting in July as well. So I have been seconded to work for a few days, really 1 day a week for now. And then as we talk about it more, perhaps a half-time secondment from my position at the library, working on these things that are mentioned here. So reviewing our implementation strategies, looking at our local policies, the current policies and where the impact statements are, reviewing, doing a scan of what's going on elsewhere, and then drafting some kind of terms of reference that we can use in implementing or creating, I should say, a campus task force around this. So that's sort of where I think we're going. And I think that's about all I have to share at this point in time. Thank you.